IT Pro in the Know, the IT Pro TV webinar series. We'll be live tweeting during the webinar at #ProsKnow. Have a question? Use the GoToWebinar question box throughout the webinar, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. You'll receive a link to a recording of the webinar delivered to your inbox. Questions not answered during the webinar will be answered on Twitter with the #ProsKnow. Now let's get started.
Hello and welcome to IT Pro in the Know, the IT Pro TV webinar series brought to you live from the IT Pro TV studios. I'm your host today, Wes Bryan, here with today's presenter, Mr. Ronnie Wong. Ronnie's coming at us with 20 years experience in IT, as well as being vendor certified by Microsoft, CompTIA, and Cisco. And he's also an edutainer here at IT Pro TV. Now, I've mentioned IT Pro TV. What exactly is IT Pro TV? Well, we call it binge-worthy IT learning because we offer an engaging way to learn and grow your career. And it doesn't matter if you're just getting started in the industry or maybe you're a seasoned professional, been doing this for a while. We've got the courses to meet your needs, and they're coming at you from a variety of globally recognized vendors such as CompTIA, Microsoft, Cisco, Apple, Linux, and we've got a myriad of topics out there for you, including some more popular ones like security as well as cloud. All online, all on demand. Remember to check us out at itpro.tv. Now, what do you say we go ahead and we will get started with today's webinar. Topic of the day, desktop as a service, rumors and reality. Ladies and gentlemen, help me in welcoming to the stage, Mr. Ronnie Wong. Ronnie, how are we doing today, sir?
I am doing well, Wes. Thank you for having me as we continue to take a look here at the idea of a new topic that we've just talked about that you've introduced here, which is desktop as a service. Now, we start talking about, there are some rumors about it, and there are some realities that we definitely need to know as we get started. So let's go ahead and take a poll here to see what our audience is actually going to actually take a look at here. Okay, so the poll question I have set up here is, what is desktop as a service? And so this will give you a chance to interact so that we can at least explain to you a few different things here. A, virtual desktop infrastructure, fairly common. You might have heard about it before, especially if you've been working in the IT industry for any length of time. B, the idea of a standardized desktop experience. So that actually is a great idea. Here's some control that you might actually go, hey, look, we need more control. We need to make sure that users aren't customizing what they need to. We want to maintain control of all of our desktops in our infrastructure as well. C, the idea that it's just some complex solution to an issue that we all deal with. The very fact that, we end of life our desktops at times. That we have to actually upgrade. We have to do all these other things. This idea of desktop as a service, moving it away from individual desktop machines, that's another one. Or D, I'm hearing about it because it's just a fad. It's starting to happen. There's a bunch of things going on here, but it's like everything else. In about 2 months from now, it'll fade away and we don't have to worry about it. So that will give our audience a chance to help us to see what they're actually considering here as we get started.
All right, very good, Ronnie. We're gonna just keep this open just a couple more seconds here, and we'll give everybody a chance here. But before we do, I like to give our subject matter experts a little test of their psychic abilities here. What do you think the answer might be from our audience?
Well, from our audience, I'm assuming that it's probably going to end up being A, is what my answer is going to be, that it is just virtual desktop infrastructure. So I don't have a clue why we're doing a webinar on it, but we're going to talk about why we are doing a webinar. But that's my guess.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you for this weekend's lottery numbers too, because you've got that right. A standard or a virtualized desktop by far was the major answer there. Secondary to that would have been the standardized desktop experience. So, all right, very good. All right. So what are we looking at?
All right. Actually, from that question, it kind of leads us to a nice thing here, right? Is it actual virtual desktop experience? Well, it could be, even though virtual desktops are a part of it, it's not the idea of the VDI itself as far as an infrastructure. It's not even the idea of even the standardized desktop experience as well. So what are we actually going to take a look at? Well, let's start off with what has caused kind of all the fervor that has been happening, okay? So when we start to take a look, there are a few things that have happened over this past month or so that we just want to address here. And that is because, well, one of the things that, of course, got it on everybody's mind is that Microsoft all of a sudden started posting for some job that was actually on, out there for somebody that's working in what we call Microsoft Managed Desktop. Now, as people started looking on their site, they realized there's no product for it. And then, of course, that's when things started getting even more heated in this way, right? So what we see are some of these different quotes, okay? Microsoft got a new plan for managing Windows 10 devices for a monthly fee. Microsoft is putting together a service aiming to take pain out of procuring, provisioning, and managing Windows 10 desktop or Windows 10 devices that's currently called Microsoft Managed Desktops. So we had somebody jump in with that, right? And that particular article is the one that everybody has kind of fed off of, because here Mary Jo Foley actually ended up talking to someone that says, hey, here's a close friend of mine that's working at Microsoft, and he's the one that's actually directing this. And she goes on to explain what this is about. Well, the issue, though, happened to be is that everybody took this announcement not as an official announcement, but pretty close, right? Because it came from Mary Jo Foley. And then you see down here in the lower left, right, where it says Stephen J. Vaughn Nichols, right? With DaaS Windows coming, say goodbye to your PC as you know it. How much are you going to like having Microsoft in charge of your desktop? So you can see where it actually kind of jumped from like, hey, here's what looks like is happening in the future, to kind of this like, hey, they're coming to take over, okay? Now, this is so popular of a topic, and it has rushed around the world so much that we even have Kim Commando, probably the most popular, radio talk show host out there about IT and products that's out there. And she just kind of jumps in and says, hey, did you hear the rumor, okay, that Windows was planning on charging a monthly fee for anyone who wanted to use Windows? Well, she goes on and answers and says, look, it's not as it's not as extreme as what you've probably been reading about, but just kind of realize. And then lastly, of course, you see where somebody finally says, hey, there's a lot of misinformation that's been circulating online because of the discovery of this new service, Microsoft is going to be rolling out, called Microsoft Managed Desktop. Now, this whole webinar is not about the idea of Microsoft Managed Desktop, but at the same time, we see where it actually started from. And that's why I wanted to make sure that we understood this idea of desktop as a service too.
Ronnie, I'm sitting here, I'm kind of chuckling in the background here, is because one of the things that seems to be consistent across the board is the inconsistency. We don't seem to have a unified definition of what, or even an understanding of what a managed desktop might be. Help our viewers out, Ronnie. What's your take on this?
All right, so like everybody else, right? You kind of have to read and you have to understand what has been happening, and then you start to listen to what people are saying. So just like everything else, here's what I've heard, okay? So when it comes down to it, Microsoft Managed Desktop, once you started reading right after the initial announcement, it was essentially the sky is falling. Now, Wes, this is kind of a panic mode. And the panic was fairly simple, that Microsoft is no longer going to be releasing regular, operating systems. You won't be able to buy anymore. You'll just have to pay a subscription to do so. And that's what they talk about as being controlled by other people that's out there, okay? Now, in that sense, even though this entire show is more about desktop as a service and not Microsoft Managed Desktop, the reason why you probably heard about it is because of this topic, okay? So in this sense, is the sky really falling? Well, we're not actually going to be able to know that for a while, but we do know something at least. So let me put it right here since we're on this subject, right? Microsoft Managed Desktop, it is something that's going to be rolling out, okay, in the future for big businesses. But as of right now, we don't know a lot of details behind it. So you do have to read a little bit more, and then you'll find out a little bit more as well, okay? But at this point, is the sky falling? Well, according to the rumor, yes. But people have been, now recently, in the past couple of weeks, been saying it's not as bad as it sounds, but we don't know. Why? Because Microsoft has kind of kept hush-hush about it until yesterday, where they actually on their own channel released an AMA, and Ask Me Anything, to address the idea of desktop as a service. So a day before our webinar, they also had essentially a question and answer session where you could ask questions about it as well. So for them, there's been enough buzz where they're trying to answer this. Now, all this directly relates into desktop as a service, which we'll get to in a moment. But I just wanted to make sure that we understand some of the ideas of what I've heard as well, okay? But when I started talking to other people out there, and they said, oh, it's just VDI, okay? It's virtual desktop infrastructure. So Wes, this is by far the most common idea, is that most people believe that this is just VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure. Well, for those that have actually worked in a virtual desktop infrastructure, in this sense, when we start talking about desktop as a service, it's not exactly the same. Now, does it tend to parallel some of the same ideas? Yes. Are the desktops that people will be using hosted somewhere besides their local computer? Yes. That's where the differences really kind of exist, right? Overall, though, okay, or similarities, excuse me, actually exist. The differences, though, are stark and vast in the very fact that we're no longer even hosting any infrastructure on site anymore. Okay, so on premises, you don't have any infrastructure. Now we've moved essentially all of that in the back end into the cloud, which means you're only really working through a service provider too. So you don't have to go through the complexities and the setup of trying to get up, the idea of some type of VDI infrastructure up and running to handle all the different components that we used to have to do. Okay, managing applications that go across these devices, managing the operating system, making sure that people have access to all those file shares in that same way. Now, do you still have to manage those things? Yes, but you don't have to set up the infrastructure for it anymore, and that's also a key when we start doing this too.
One of the former operations that I worked with, Ronnie, we had a VDI infrastructure, and I can tell you, on premises, even though it had certainly had a lot of benefits, it had a lot of challenges with it too, which means even a slightest interruption in the network, users lost all their productivity. So does this alleviate some of that by offloading that necessity and some of that heavy lifting and putting it in the, maybe the burden of the provider themselves?
Yeah, what we'll end up seeing as we go on through this is that the idea of desktop as a service does help us to alleviate some of those concerns that we've actually had to address, but it really eliminates the complexity that we would normally have on premises in setting up a VDI. So that's kind of one of the things that we have to actually think about as well. So is VDI actually the true reality of this? No, it's a rumor, but at the same time, most people will equate to this. So I'm not trying to be the total 100% like here it is, we've got to divide the line right here, but at least in my perspective, it is different in that sense, and that's why I say that it's a rumor as well. Okay?
One of the things I see on your list here, and I wonder, Ronnie, if this is going to be something that's going to be very burdening to users. You talk about licensing, or at least in the slide, you've talked about licensing models, and I've had to activate Windows machines on numerous occasions. And what would you do? You'd find your ISO, your stock keeping unit that would marry to that or map to that ISO, and you'd activate your machine, and it was pretty straightforward what the process was. Now, is this going to get a little muddy now that we're coming into this new service? Tell me a little bit about the licensing.
I think you have the rumor exactly right. This is going to get a little bit more muddied in that sense, right? The very fact is nobody knows exactly what the licensing model is going to be. For those of us that went through this with a VDI type of infrastructure, we started realizing not only do we have to provide licensing for our Windows server, right, that are out there, but we also have to provide client access license as well so that we can manage those things too. Well, with this idea of the desktop as a service, there still has to be licensing for every individual person that's going to end up needing a desktop at some point. Now, in that sense, we do have to actually worry about what that actually means for us. And the people that's probably going to have to address this a little bit more, right, are the people that will have existing licenses. They're already a volume licensed customer of, let's say, Microsoft. And I specifically put Microsoft in parentheses because normally on Linux environments, unless we're running, Red Hat, we're really not worried about licensing too much. But in the Microsoft environment, we are worried about this. So now the idea, though, is managing those licenses. Is it going to be harder? Well, some people absolutely say, yeah, it's going to be a nightmare for this to happen. But Microsoft, especially with the Microsoft Managed Desktop, at least the way that they're starting to kind of roll this out, is because they've already been so successful with the idea of a subscription model for software. For those of us that have actually been using it now for years, Office 365, it seems to have been fairly successful. So they have some, challenges or wins. I'm trying to remember the right word that I want to use. In other words, they actually have a win under their belt using that particular model, and it may follow that. But for all that we know, it may not. It may follow the VDI model, in which now it becomes a little bit more nightmarish. But the issue right now is we don't know. So what are people doing? They're making rumors about it. Okay, that's what ends up happening. So we do have to address this, but that is by far probably the hardest part of some of the things that we'll have to deal with. Okay, and of course, the last issue that I want us to address here, as far as the rumors, okay, is that people started, and I started talking about it, it's like, wow, that sounds like a neat idea if we wanted to do this. But everybody started now complaining about the need for higher bandwidth. If we're going to run our desktops, in the cloud, well, now the bandwidth that we'll have for these connections is going to be huge, right? I have, 300-400 users, and they're all going to require this huge amount of bandwidth to be able to cover what I actually need. Well, what it really does boil down to, and we'll talk about it in a moment here, is that we're probably going to see something. It's not going to actually require that at all, but it depends on each service provider and where they're actually going to, be, in comparison to the location of where these desktops are going to be hosted. But overall, though, can it require a high amount of bandwidth? It can. It depends on what you're doing. But we, once again, don't know until we really dive into it a little bit more. And this is going to be per provider is what we want to actually think about.
So, Ronnie, those are some of the rumors, right? That's what we've heard. Tell me a little bit more about actuality. When it comes down to it, the rubber meets the road, right? What are we facing?
All right. So when it comes down to reality, okay, here's what it comes down to, right? Desktop as a service is a cloud service, okay? And that's kind of key, right? That means it's going to be provided by some cloud service provider. And if you think about your experience with the cloud provisioning that you've done for just about anything else, okay, it can be relatively simple to use. Now, I say can be. Can it be more complex? Well, it depends on what your setup is. But yes, it can be relatively simple to use, such as even 1, 2, 3, 4, as you see right here on the screen, right? What do I mean by that when I say it can be relatively simple to use? One, most of them, if you take for an example, like Amazon Workspaces here as just an example, right? What they're saying is simple. You tell me how many desktops that you need, okay? And you provision that number of desktops. That's it, okay? Then in the background, they'll create all of those different ones. In other words, they'll provision those instances or images that they need, and they'll handle all of that for you. And what do I have to do as a company or as the IT professional? Well, at this point, Wes, the third part is the hardest step, okay? And the hardest step in terms of this is you got to pay for it, okay? So it's kind of the weird thing. In other words, they will handle the heavy load side of it. They'll handle the infrastructure, they'll handle the storage, they'll handle everything, even the performance of everything that we actually want and need here, okay? And you can customize that to a point to what you actually need, but you'll have to pay for it. But the neat thing is that it can be done very quickly, and you and I don't have to worry about, do I need to add another server in, okay? You simply go, I need another 15 desktops. Well, they can do that. They can host that for you. Now, I'm using AWS Workspaces as an example, but you'll see that there's so many providers out there for desktop as a service. You have your choice. There's a plethora of them like crazy, and they would all love your business. Now, I can't tell you one's better than the other one, but what I can tell you is that they all want your business here. So they want to make it as simple and as easy to use. They want it to be a cloud service, and that way you tell them how many you want, let them do it, and then you simply pay for it as you go. So that idea of pay as you go is still the model. Since the reality of this is a cloud service, that's what they want to keep here.
The simplicity sounds like it makes it a very attractive offer. I know that I've had to deal with VDI solutions before, Ronnie, and one of the things that I remember is that, if you lost any bit of network connectivity, the user couldn't log on, and I know that's par on the course for a lot of technologies as well. But the other thing is, if they couldn't communicate with the server, no config files came down, and become a nightmare. So tell me a little bit about this changing the focus to the user here.
Yeah. Well, when it comes down to it, right, the idea of changing the focus a little bit more here is something that we want to drive to. The very fact is with VDI, like you said, people notice the infrastructure a lot more, okay? With the idea of desktop as a service, though, okay, what we really have is the focus changing. Instead of people worrying like, is this going to connect or not? Most of the testing that people have done, and if you read all the case studies that are out there, that most people think that this is a relatively seamless environment. And what that means is that after they get used to it a little bit more, they actually even prefer it because it allows them to get to work right away. When they bring it up, when everything is actually easy and done and and ready to go, it's there and it's up and it works like a regular desktop environment does. Okay. The reality is that also at the same time, will people experience a little bit of lag when they do connect in if they don't have enough bandwidth? Well, there is that chance and that possibility. But the reality is most of us have at least the 1 megabit connection that we might need, or if you actually have a high performing one, it might even require a little bit more. So And if there is some focus that makes them focus in on the infrastructure part, it might be that performance lag. But most of the companies, like everything else, recommend that you're actually going to end up being with a cloud service provider that will locate your desktops very close to where you are, so that you'll have, less than 100 millisecond latency. Anything more than that, you're going to notice anyways. Okay. Besides that, but overall, though, depending on your provider, you may end up seeing that they're very efficient with the way that their bandwidth usage is going to be. So when I say the focus is on the user, it is on them being up and functional as much as possible. And in that sense, it provides for them a lot more, okay, that they can actually get access to through multiple devices too, okay? Now, the other thing I want to point out here is the idea of the ease of management, okay? It's like any other service provider where you have a single portal that you can quickly also, of course, deprovision or deactivate that image. So if, for example, Wes actually kind of comes to us and all of a sudden he leaves my environment, well, he might have actually at one point had a laptop that I issued to him with the operating system and all the software on there, and Wes decides not to come back. Well, I'm out a pretty good chunk of change at that point. With this one, whatever I issue to him, and I'm not saying you should do this, but whatever I issue to him, that's what Wes gets. But the desktop itself, I simply deprovision it, and if I do so, I don't pay for that because I'm no longer using it anymore. So those are some of the things that we can do here, and that's the key as well. The licensing at this point in terms of reality, okay, it just depends on what you have. The neat thing about the licensing varying here, right, is that on most of the service providers out there, they will allow you to do your BYOL, right? Bring your own license into their environment, but you'll have to work that out with the service provider. Or you can probably do what I would do instead. Go, hey, I'm willing to pay the extra money for each image that I'm going to do, and I'm going to choose this particular image, whether it's Windows or whether it's Linux here. And if it's Windows, they will go ahead and just charge me, a little bit more for the license for that particular image. And now I don't even have to worry about managing the licenses. In other words, if we add in 25 new employees, well, now I'd have to go, all right, Wes, make sure we have 25 new licenses for every Windows 10, machine that I'm going to end up running. Okay, I don't have to do that. I just simply provision those 10, pay the extra fee, and it can do that as well. Now, if you're going to do your BYOL, you of course will still have to manage that. So that's why I said the licensing will end up varying for us as we start to see this. All right, so speaking of all that, right, when we talk about that idea of the rumors and realities behind this, well, some of us may be still trying to say, all right, so what in the world is desktop as a service then? Well, I just wanted to make sure that we understand something. So even though I focused around the very beginning here of using Microsoft Managed Desktop as a kind of launching point for us, it's really not new. It has been around for a while, okay? So people have been using it, like I said, kind of its progenitor is the idea of VDI, right? Where we are hosting our own infrastructure and everything's actually kind of being pushed out to a thin client or a zero client or whatever it might be. But the very fact is now that all that has been offloaded up to the cloud services, these have been around for a while. And in that sense, it means it's a lot easier for us to be able to use, okay? So because it is this way, okay, it's not brand new. Most of us have just heard about it if we're just kind of new to this because of the big announcements that have been going on last couple of weeks. Remember that everything is no longer hosted anywhere on our on-premise, which means I don't have to worry about a lot of things here when I start doing this, okay? The very fact is, because I'm depending on the service provider, well, they probably have redundancies and backups and everything else that every service provider would have, which are things I might not have too, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. The other thing about it is, of course, notice my third point here, right? Accessible desktop regardless of where and what device. So when we start to take a look at something like this, hey, for example, I'm going to use AWS again because I'm the one that actually, I use that one if I use anyone, right? You can do this on an iPad, a Kindle Fire, okay? Android tablet, Windows PC. You can run it on a Mac if you want to, okay? You can use zero clients or thin clients. It doesn't matter. So that way, if your company is more relying on that BYOD, where you're bringing your own device, and you're still having them to use the desktop, it can run. It doesn't seem to need very much power on your end to make that happen. All you have to actually do is what the same thing is that you allow them that connection to it, and then you're off and ready to go, and you're fine. Now, of course, like every other cloud subscription, it is, or like every other cloud provider and solution that we have, it's subscription based. Now, what does that mean? That means you have options. Okay, you can create your own custom image, and they'll charge you more, more or less. Okay, you bring your own license, they'll charge you a little bit less. You create your own custom image. You can even create bundles, and all that goes into, of course, the price of that subscription. And now you, as the IT professional in your department, you're just having to make the choice of those bundles that you're doing, or the infrastructure that you're doing, or is it the desktop image that you want without the applications that you want to run. You name it. You can have it any way you want to, as long as you're willing to pay for it. And then that cloud service in that way is something that we definitely want to actually think about as we do so. Okay. All right. So after knowing all that, why in the world would I actually choose to do this? If I'm already doing everything, okay, and don't have to worry about it, why would I choose to even consider something like desktop as a service? Well, the overall total cost of ownership, the end of life of equipment, hardware that ends up breaking down, capital expenditures, all of that pretty much gets lower, okay? We don't have to actually have a need for deploying any type of VDI infrastructure locally at all, okay? So there's no extra CapEx that we have to worry about, no upfront CapEx. We don't have to actually have any additional outlay for brand new equipment, such as new desktops. The idea of having to deploy images or installation time and having to deploy more software, it kind of disappears in that sense. Now, does it take a little bit more setup at the front here? Yes, if you're managing it, it does. Security and compliance, the same thing. The neat thing about this is data will actually be stored in the cloud, no longer on people's own personal devices or on the local hard drive, which can actually end up failing, okay? It can meet compliance standard depending on the service provider as well. Accessibility and mobility. The neat thing about the accessibility, since cloud providers tend to have no real issues with local power outages, you and I don't have to worry about the idea of people losing information because of power outages on our own. Telecommuting becomes a little bit easier, and the idea of actually our workforce being connected wherever they are. The idea of scalable and global here is pretty much the key. So you name it, there's so many different aspects of what we can actually take a look at and do, okay? But this actually allows us to change from something here, okay? We end up changing from the idea of needing to deploy to simply telling a cloud service provider, what, here's what I need, and they provide it, right? It's changing from a deployment and an infrastructure model to the idea of a subscription and a service model, okay? And that is a cool thing for us, at least for me, okay? Also, with the scalability, right? We need more, we get more, because those providers are actually there to do that. When I need more right now, what if I'm over my budget right now? Well, then I don't have that ability to do anything else, okay? Provider data centers are also located across the globe. The reason why that's important, okay, is because very simply here, okay, the very fact is when we start to actually take a look at all of this information, right, depending on where we are in the world, well, we might actually be a lot farther away. But because we do have a global scale on most of these service providers, they'll help locate even those particular desktops in those regions so that you can actually get the best possible experience that you can get. And that's also key.
Ronnie, let me ask a question based on mobility. You had told us what we've already learned here is that, I can access this from any device, and you listed a variety of different devices. So theoretically, and again, depending on the provider, we'd have to research it, I can have a a workstation at my desk, go from that maybe to a conference room and a laptop, and then telecommute and potentially still have access to that same desktop environment, even if I'm sitting at my house.
That is true.
That's very
impressive.
impressive.
The neat thing is you're still working on the very same desktop. So you're not having to relaunch a new one. You're not actually reestablishing. It is your desktop. And with everything being stored where it is, it does provide a bit more security, even more secure, right? If you have an Active Directory environment on premises, you can even have them use your local your on-premises Active Directory login. And all you're doing is you're actually creating a VPN connection from your desktops back over too. So everything actually does work in the way that we want to. All right, Wes, well, that brings us right here to the idea, okay, is remember that when we start talking about desktop as a service at this point, it's not going away, okay? So as much as we want to ignore it, kick it under the bed, whatever we want to do, okay, it's been around for a while, but now because of the fervor of what we've heard about with managed desktops, Microsoft is starting to push this a little bit more. I'm not saying that they're going to shove it right into our face, but on the large ones, right, on the large, gigantic businesses, they're starting to say, here's an option for you. most businesses will probably end up taking a look at a little bit more. The functionality, right, is the focus and no longer the infrastructure. That's a key point that I want to also get across as well. And also what we talked about here, in the end, when you actually want to adopt it, you still got to do the same things as normal, right? Plan, test, and implement. But the neat thing is, unlike VDI, right? VDI, Wes gets to make the decision. Here's the infrastructure we're going to use. Ronnie has to live with it. That's pretty much it as an end user. But in this one, the end user experience will end up deciding the success. Can they do their functionality? Can they do what they want to? And if all of a sudden you're doing this in testing and now it goes away, in other words, Ronnie says, I don't like it, okay, and all the other users don't like it, guess what? I simply go ahead and get rid of all of those different subscriptions. And Wes, I'm no longer stuck with the thousands of dollars of additional infrastructure and licensing I had already purchased for my end users to tell me what? They don't like it, okay? So all that's actually good stuff that we want to make sure that we understand and that we know about, because it's important that as we start making decisions for our companies, especially in the small to medium business market. Like I said, I'm a small to medium business guy. I'm not the big, gigantic, market guy here. But in that sense, right, that's what I want us to actually take away from what we've actually learned about today as well, okay? All right, so Wes, I've gone ahead and also, of course, have left a little bit of time for some questions.
Very good. This is one of my favorite times in the spot. Don't be that student that sits in the back of the classroom, doesn't ask the teacher questions, right? We need some of you front row students in there to ask us questions, and looks like we already have some of them coming in for you there, Ronnie. So question number one, David from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, our neighbors to the north of us, said, would Amazon Workspaces or VMware Horizon Cloud be categorized as a DaaS?
Yes and yes. Okay, Amazon Workspaces definitely categorized as, of course, desktop as a service. And VMware Horizon, it can be as well. Now, with VMware Horizon, though, there is a lot more infrastructure setup that you have to be able to do. So that requires a bit more training if you're going to do that. So make sure you check that out. So don't just assume that it's always going to be that pay as a service and then you're ready to go, okay? So you want to look for those depending on your need. Do you actually need some additional infrastructure to run the Horizon stuff that you actually need to run? But with Amazon Workspaces, though, it really is as simple as you selecting like, oh, I want the higher performing one. I want the graphics package, or I want the regular desktop functionality. Once you choose that, Amazon Workspaces will actually work, incredibly well, in what you actually need, because they're probably the biggest player in the market for this at the same time. But remember that it all depends on what it is that you're looking for in your environment. But both of them would actually be considered desktop as a service. One a little bit more complex, but the other one, though, I really do love the AWS Workspaces.
All right, thank you for that answer. So it looks like we've got a few questions coming in. So keep them coming in, ladies and gentlemen out there. We've got question. The second one here is coming from Hassan in Liverpool, UK. Says, will the Microsoft VDI risk the technician's job? And Hassan did not confirm or deny that he knows any of the Beatles, but his favorite song is Don't Let Me Down.
All right. No. Okay. So in other words, it won't. The reason why is that at the same time, right, even though the VDI infrastructure is something that an IT professional would generally end up supporting a lot, the very fact is with Microsoft as a desktop, Microsoft managed desktops, especially in that environment, there's still going to be some complexity behind it, but not a lot. You still have to actually worry a little bit, right? Are your end users actually able to do so? But your concerns will actually go into addressing the needs of the user, which is what we really want to do. We really don't want to have to be troubleshooting why somebody can't, why in the world isn't the file share actually being able to get access? Why isn't my computer receiving the updates, or my thin client actually getting the image that it needs downloaded anymore? We really want to be more user focused and more business focused as part of the IT team instead.
Another great answer, and it looks like these questions keep coming in. So ladies and gentlemen, keep them coming. So this one is from Walter from North Carolina, and he asks, if I'm using DaaS, can I connect to my equipment as a network operator, for instance, take a SSH and SSH into a Linux server or a Cisco router?
Yes. Okay. So as long as you have all those pathways set up, you will be able to, right? So you can do this, like I was mentioning during the webinar, a portion of this, right? That if you have your Active Directory infrastructure, you normally will, of course, create your VPN connection to your service provider. And from that, all your traffic will end up flowing in that way. So can you still do that with the other devices? Yes, it still works as part of your infrastructure, but now in the cloud too. So you'll just have to check with the service provider on if there's any special requirements, the way that they want it actually working. But besides that, it should work just fine.
All right, great information. So thank you out there, Walter. We got another one coming in. This is Jedediah. Jedediah asks, how does DaaS appear to the end user if they had a thin client? They launch an app to get to the host. Do they launch an app to get to the hosted desktop? And does the provider provide a thin OS? So we've got a couple of questions here. We'll start with the first one. How does DaaS appear to the end user?
Okay, DaaS appears to the end user at the very beginning, depending on, of course, well, the service provider, more than likely just as a client. So if you were running a Windows desktop or a Mac desktop, you just click on a button and it looks like another application. But when it loads up, it is a fully functioning device. Okay, and that's actually what we want to actually understand, is that the end user is no longer worried about whether or not everything is connecting. Even the things like accessing printers and different devices here, all that will be available depending on the device that you're sitting at. Now, does that mean it'll work on thin clients too? Yes, it'll work on thin clients. So the most popular version that something like AWS Workspaces works on are things also like zero clients, where you're just kind of launching it up as long as your network connection is up and good to the internet, and it points to the right place. Then you'll actually get your particular desktop on that zero client as well, which means there's no real underlying operating system. It's just going to launch up and do everything for you as well. Okay, so those are the other parts too. Now, I don't remember the other part of the question.
The last
okay.
one, and the last one's a little tricky one there. It says, does the host provider provide a thin OS? So my thought is that is this some kind of stripped down, optimized solution, with a lighter footprint?
Well, it can. Okay, so not everything in this sense, right? So you'll have to actually check out if you're talking about the instance and bundles that every individual desktop end user will actually need. You can provide just a regular desktop functionality, or you may even say, here is the additional software that I need, or here's something else that I need. I need more power. I need a graphics environment. I want to be able to run Adobe Creative Suite. I want to be able to do all that. You'll pay more for that. And so it just depends on what each provider will do. Now, the other thing that's neat about this, Wes, though, is that I can provide my own custom images too. In other words, I can actually build my own image and upload that into my service provider. I do this in Amazon Workspaces or AWS Workspace. I'm going to call it wrong all the time. AWS Workspaces. And that way I can say, hey, this is the custom image that I want for my users. And they, of course, will verify that you have the license if you do your BYOB, BYOL. They'll have to do that. But once they do that, they'll have to, of course, measure out what performance model that you actually need for your desktop deployments to actually do that. So all that will have to be worked out with the service provider itself.
All right, very good. Another question coming in here. This is from Patrick, and it says, could DaaS be used by an organization to outsource their IT department?
It not only can be used, it is absolutely being used for that right now, okay? And what do I mean by that? Well, remember that with telecommuting, right? And that's what a lot of people like doing. Now, you can literally serve up the desktop environment that you want even your telecommuters to use, and you don't even have to buy them a machine, right? If they're telecommuting, you just go, all right, from your machine, click on this, and now you can do that. And if you want them to, it can be Active Directory joined as well, and you can manage it from there if you're doing this. So it can be, doesn't mean that that's its only purpose, no, okay? What it does is offer that flexibility that we talked about. Wherever you go in the world, if you travel a lot, right, you still have the same desktop experience and the consistency that you want. And it also provides that ability to customize for everybody that you want as well. Remember that the whole goal is simple. It's what your end users need. You can customize that. You're just going to pay more for like additional performance if you're doing that, or more for licensing if you need to add in, additional software. But you don't have to worry about buying a new computer because Wes decided that he's going to run AutoCAD one day instead. So you just go, all right, he's going to run AutoCAD. Here's what the license is. Here's what we're going to put on this image. And then, the cloud provider just says, all right, here it is. This is how much it's going to cost you per hour, per day, whatever it might be.
All right, very good. Thank you for that answer. All right, we got another question coming in here. This is Jim from Upland, California, asking about Microsoft. Says, is Microsoft currently supporting DaaS, and is Microsoft a DaaS provider?
Right now, we don't know. See, that's the thing, right? So right now, in their Microsoft managed desktop, the only thing that they're saying is it's really about the upkeep and essentially the licensing, right? So that way, because of the way that the upkeep, the update model that they're having, people are having such problems with it. Well, why don't you actually let them do it, right? So you're going to pay just a monthly fee, and they'll keep it updated. They'll do all that for you, okay? But they haven't actually said what they're going to do in the future for how this is going to work out, in the end. So at this point, they're just saying it's really about keeping everything up to date, and that way you don't have to worry about managing all that. We'll keep it up to date, and you don't have to worry about any of that. So you just pay a model for it. If we update, we'll manage it all. That's all you're doing. But there has another, I have to actually go to a rumor here, right? The other rumor, of course, is that they're trying to tie this to probably the future Surface devices that are out there. So that when you buy a new Surface tablet, what you're really getting is that managed desktop, which means that they are a DaaS provider as well as a hardware provider at that point. And all you're doing is when you sign up, right, and you go and do that, you're just paying a monthly fee. You've bought your device, you're just paying a monthly fee for the operating system, and it'll be right there. But you still do have a limitation. You'll have to be connected to the internet. So in that sense, most of us don't find that as being a limitation anymore. But if you do travel in those places where it's hard to get to, and you get low internet connection, just be willing to experience the performance hits that you'll get there too.
All right, great answer. Thank you, Jim, out there. We appreciate that question there. Now, next one's coming up, Chance in El Dorado, Arkansas. How might a small MSP, managed service provider, leverage DaaS for their clients, which are mainly small businesses, footprints as 10 to 20 workstations?
Yeah, well, that's actually kind of something in which you can probably do, right? The very fact is, depending on the number of clients that you have, you can probably build out something for each one of them. And the neat thing is, you once again are just really managing it through their portal, whatever it might be, right? A web-based portal. And you can probably go ahead and do that as well. Now, what they, of course, would like you to do is you could send them directly to the actual cloud provider that's doing this. But you could probably open, up your own and say, hey, look, I'm going to provide this too as part of my service. So it will work as long as they have machines, that can handle the client. As long as they have internet connection, yeah, you can provide it for all of your clients. And it's probably something that means you don't have to worry about providing desktops again as far as hardware machine goes. You don't have to worry about licensing on your own anymore. You can just say, here's how much we're going to charge you for it, and we'll have that ready to go for you, and it'll be up and operating and going too. So I don't see any problem with it.
All right, very good. I do want to address something. We do want to let Jeffrey know we had your question, we lost it, but I want you to know, resubmit your question, and we're gonna answer you directly, personally, if you will. So we do apologize for that, Jeffrey, ahead of time. However, we have another question coming in. This is Jason. I'm going to try this. Goose Bay, Oregon. I'm not sure if I got that name right. If I did, I apologize ahead of time. With Azure already offering virtual machines, what are some of the differences between this and MS's managed desktop?
Yeah, there really isn't much difference, right? So in other words, this idea of Microsoft Managed Desktop, what has happened is because Windows 10 has been attached to this name, that's kind of the big thing. So as far as desktop as a service and the Azure Managed Desktop, like what we was talking about, it really is the same thing, okay? So, it's something I also mentioned is that this is not a new technology. It's been around. You've been able to do so. The big buzz and the rumor and why people are more interested in it is because they attached Windows 10 to it, and people got scared right away because they thought, here it is, once you don't pay that subscription fee, you're kind of locked out and you're done. But now you're starting to see that, hey, it's been around for a while. They've always been doing it. They're just trying to roll out this model instead. And that's because it's been so successful with the Office 365 and now moving to Microsoft 365, you name it, but that's it. So for those of you that are worried, like, is this something different? No, it's not. It really is about the same thing.
All right, that was the last question, and I do want to just restate this. Keep in mind, Jeffrey, please resubmit your question, and we will answer you personally. Now, I do have an offer for you. I want you guys to keep in mind that if you like what you've seen here today, you might want to take a look at an IT Pro TV membership. You can check out a free membership, no credit card required, with access to select courses and our daily live feed. You can also get a full membership, and that provides complete access to our course library with or without practice exams. Now, the next one here is my personal favorite. If you're on a team and you want to check out the Teams page online, which offers a tour of the Pro Portal used to maximize your team's investment in training. That's itpro.tv/4teams. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you being with us today, and thank you for joining us, and thank you to you, Ronnie, as always, for being here. We're going to go ahead and sign out. Remember, I've been your host today, Wes Bryan.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. You'll receive a link to a recording of the webinar delivered to your inbox. All of the questions we didn't get to will be answered via Twitter at #ProsKnow. Remember that coupon code is webinar30. See you next time on IT Pro in the Know, the IT Pro TV webinar series.